It was born 1 year before Coca-Cola, created in 1885 by a Brooklyn-born pharmacist in a small Texas drugstore. It was the very first major soft drink in American history. It was not a cola, not a root beer, not a fruit punch. It was something entirely its own, a mysterious blend of 23 flavors that no chemist has ever publicly decoded, no scientist has ever officially explained, and no competitor has ever successfully copied. And yet, despite being America's oldest soda, it spent most of the 20th century wandering the beverage world without a real home. Walk into Morrison's Old Corner drugstore on the corner of 4th Street and Austin Avenue in Waco, Texas, in the autumn of 1885. The air inside smells like medicine, wood polish, and the sweet carbonated mist rising from the soda fountain. Behind the counter stands Charles Cortese Alderton, 28 years old, meticulous, curious, and increasingly obsessed with the question, what would happen if he combined every appealing scent in the drugstore into a single drink? He experimented for months. He tested combinations that failed, combinations that tasted wrong, and combinations that came tantalizingly close. Then one day he found it. A formula of 23 ingredients, fruit extracts, spices, a sharp phosphoric bite that smelled somehow like the drugstore itself, much like warmth and familiarity and something you could not quite name. He offered it first to his employer, Wade Morrison. Morrison loved it. The customers loved it. They called it a Waco, and they could not get enough. What followed was one of the most extraordinary origin stories in American business history. By 1904, the drink was introduced to 20 million people at the Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis, Missouri. By the 1920s, it was incorporated as a formal company in Dallas, Texas. By the 1970s, it had launched one of the most beloved advertising campaigns in television history. At its peak, it was the cultural heartbeat of the American South. Workers drank it at 10, 2, and 4 every afternoon. Cowboys drank it. Rock and roll stars drank it. Entire towns in Virginia and Texas built their identities around it. Then something went catastrophically wrong. The company collapsed into insolvency. Corporate raiders dismembered it. Its international identity was sold off. Its formula, still locked in 2 separate bank vaults in Dallas, watched helplessly as the brand it defined was passed from one parent company to another, then another, then another, still. A candy company from Britain, an investment bank from Dallas, a coffee pod manufacturer from Vermont. In the span of 40 years, America's original soda became a beverage orphan. Brilliant, beloved, but incapable, of finding a permanent home. So how does the oldest soda in America end up owned by a coffee company? How does a drink born in a Texas pharmacy end up with its soul scattered across 4 continents under 3 different corporate owners? And is what rises from that wreckage today still the same drink Alderton created in 1885? This is the story of Dr. Pepper's rise, its abandonment, and its unlikely, haunting resurrection. Welcome inside the drugstore, the boardroom, and the courtroom where America's most original soft drink fought, repeatedly and desperately, to remain itself. 1885, Waco, Texas. The city of Waco in 1885 was a place of ambition and dust, of cotton merchants and cattle drives, of a population just beginning to discover that a town on the Brazos River might amount to something. Morrison's Old Corner drugstore sat at the intersection of 4th Street and Austin Avenue, one of the busiest corners in town, where locals gathered not just to fill prescriptions, but to linger at the soda fountain and socialize. It was a culture, not just a commerce. Into this world stepped Charles Cortese Alderton, born June 21, 1857, in Brooklyn, New York, the eldest son of English immigrants. He had attended Framlingham College in England, studied medicine at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, and arrived in Waco as a trained pharmacist with the precise, methodical mind of the scientist. But it was not science alone that drove him. It was curiosity. An almost childlike fascination with the way that smells could summon emotions, the way the particular blend of fruit syrups, mineral water, and carbon dioxide rising from the soda fountain could make a person feel, even briefly, like everything was good. Alderton observed his customers the way a scientist observes a phenomenon. He noticed that they grew bored. The standard flavors of the day, sarsaparilla, lemon, vanilla, had been done to death. People wanted something new, something unexpected, something they could not immediately classify. And so, in his spare time behind the counter, Alderton began to experiment. He combined fruit extracts in proportions no one had tried. He added spices. He adjusted the carbonation. He tested and failed and tested again, with the patience of a man who believed the answer was in there somewhere. Yet the breakthrough came in the autumn of 1885, the exact date lost to history, though the month of December is most often cited. Alderton presented his creation first to Morrison. Morrison drank it, paused, and said yes. The two men began offering it to fountain customers. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People ordered it by asking Alderton to shoot them a Waco. Word spread across town. Other soda fountains in Waco began requesting the syrup. The demand outgrew the drugstore within months. Alderton, it turned out, had no interest in building a business. He was a pharmacist. He loved his work and wanted to continue it. So he offered the formula freely to Morrison and to a young beverage chemist named Robert S. Lazenby, who had also tasted the drink and seen its potential. In 1891, Morrison and Lazenby formed the Artesian Manufacturing and Bottling Company in Waco. America's original soft drink had its first real home. But here's the thing. The man who made it never profited from it. Charles Alderton walked away, returned to pharmacy, and died in Waco on May 29, 1941, 56 years after inventing one of the most recognized drinks in American history. He gave away a gold mine and seemed entirely at peace with that decision. What Lazenby and Morrison built in his wake would grow beyond anything a drugstore pharmacist could have imagined. But the drink would always carry the ghost of that original generosity. The strange, selfless act that gave it life. 1904. St. Louis, Missouri. The Louisiana Purchase Exposition of 1904 was the largest World's Fair America had ever seen, drawing nearly 20 million visitors from around the country and the world. It was the stage upon which the ice cream cone made its debut, where hamburgers were first served on buns, and where a Texas soda with an unpronounceable 23-flavor formula was introduced to a nation of strangers. Robert S. Lazenby brought Dr. Pepper to the fair and watched it transform overnight from a regional curiosity into a national sensation. Visitors who had never heard of it lined up to try something they could not quite describe. It tasted like nothing else on the grounds. It was not a cola. It was not a root beer. It was not anything they could compare to anything they already knew. That mystery, that delicious, maddening unclassifiability, would become Dr. Pepper's greatest asset, and much later, its greatest curse. By 1902, the Southwestern Soda Fountain Company had changed its name to the Dr. Pepper Company. By 1906, a three-story Richardsonian Romanesque building had been completed at the corner of 5th and Mary Street in Waco, the first building ever constructed specifically to bottle Dr. Pepper. It was a monument, not just a factory, and it announced to the world that this drink, this strange Texas miracle, was here to stay. In 1923, Lazenby's son-in-law, J.B. O'Hara, moved the company's headquarters from Waco to Dallas, where it was formally incorporated as the Dr. Pepper Company. From Dallas, the business expanded aggressively through a network of independent bottlers across the South and Southwest. By the 1930s, it had become the dominant soft drink in Texas, Oklahoma, and much of the Deep South, building fierce local loyalty in towns and cities that would remain pepper country for generations to come. The company's early slogans captured this spirit of differentiation. From 1910 to 1914, It carried the slogan, King of Beverages. Then came Drink a Bit, to eat at 10, 2, and 4. Based on research showing that people experienced natural energy dips at 10:30 in the morning, 2:30 in the afternoon, and 4:30 at night. Yes, the campaign became part of Southern daily life. Workers across the region built their breaks around those hours. The phrase became cultural shorthand for a moment of rest and refreshment. Meanwhile, the formula itself was being treated like a state secret. The recipe, allegedly split into 2 halves and stored in separate safe deposit boxes in 2 different Dallas banks, was never patented, never published, never even partially disclosed. The secrecy was deliberate. The Coca-Cola's formula was famous for being hidden. Dr. Pepper's formula was hidden so completely that to this day, no one outside the company has verified exactly what those 23 flavors are. Prune juice is not one of them, despite a rumor that dates back to at least the 1930s. By the time World War II arrived, Dr. Pepper was woven into the fabric of the American South, but the war was coming, and the cola wars that followed would test whether a drink that refused to be classified could survive in a world that was rapidly being divided into 2 sides. 1951. Dallas, Texas. The post-war American economy was booming, and the soft drink industry was booming with it. Coca-Cola had emerged from the war years as an almost sacred American institution. It had been sent overseas with the troops, its factories following the Allied advance across Europe and the Pacific. Pepsi-Cola had spent the war years finding its footing and would spend the 1950s and 60s chasing Coke with increasing ferocity. Into this battlefield of colas walked Dr. Pepper, armed with something neither giant possessed: a legal argument about what soft drinks were actually allowed to do. In January of 1951, the Dr. Pepper Company filed a lawsuit against the Coca-Cola Company for $750,000, equivalent to roughly $7.7 million in today's money, alleging that Coca-Cola was selling its 6.5-ounce bottles below cost in order to drive competitors out of the market. The suit was a declaration of war. Dr. Pepper was not going to sit quietly in the shadow of the cola duopoly. The lawsuit signaled something deeper than a legal dispute, and it announced that W.W.W. Foots Clements, who would become the company's president and CEO, understood that Dr. Pepper's survival depended on its legal classification as much as its flavor. If Dr. Pepper was a cola, it would always be third. If it was something else, a pepper drink, a category unto itself, then the rules of the game changed entirely. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration would eventually confirm what the company had long argued. Dr. Pepper was not a cola, not a root beer, and not a fruit-flavored soft drink. It belonged to a distinct category that would come to be called pepper soda, a classification named for the brand itself. This determination had consequences. It meant that Coca-Cola bottlers, legally restricted from carrying competing cola products, could carry Dr. Pepper without violating their agreements, because Dr. Pepper was not a cola. In 1969, Clements leveraged this ruling to persuade the Coca-Cola Bottling Company of New York, the largest Coca-Cola bottler in the world, to begin distributing Dr. Pepper in the New York metropolitan area. It was a masterstroke. Overnight, Dr. Pepper gained access to a distribution network it could never have built itself, in the most competitive soft drink market in the country. Then came 1972. Once Coca-Cola introduced a soft drink called Peppo, and Dr. Pepper sued immediately for trademark infringement. The lawsuit was settled when Coca-Cola agreed to rename their product. They called it Mr. Pibb. It was a tacit acknowledgement that Dr. Pepper had created a flavor category so distinct that even the world's most powerful beverage company needed to be careful around it. The problem was building, not from outside, from inside. The very independence that made Dr. Pepper so defiant was also making it increasingly vulnerable to the brutal economics of a market dominated by companies with infinitely deeper pockets. The cola wars were getting expensive. And Dr. Pepper was about to find out what happens when you run out of money fighting giants. 1977, Las Vegas, Nevada. The Dr. Pepper Company gathered its bottlers at the Sahara Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas for the annual bottlers meeting. And the company's executives unveiled an advertising campaign that would change everything. They had identified a problem. Current drinkers liked the product, but they were not drinking it frequently enough. The company needed to convert casual fans into devoted ones, and it needed to reach the age group it most wanted. Teenagers and young adults between 13 and 30. The campaign they unveiled was called Be a Pepper. The man they hired to embody it was David Walsh Naughton, born February 13, 1951, in West Hartford, Connecticut. Naughton was a University of Pennsylvania graduate with a drama degree and no particular dancing credentials when his agent, taking considerable liberties with his resume, sent him to audition for a Texas soda company's newest commercial. He got the job anyway. The concept was simple and brilliant. Naughton would play a kind of modern Pied Piper, starting on the streets of New York, singing the Be a Pepper jingle, and gathering a growing crowd of followers as the camera moved from city to city. The choreography, organized by Tony Stevens, was elaborate and theatrical. The jingle, written by Jake Holmes in 1977, was immediately memorable. I'm a pepper, he's a pepper, she's a pepper, we're a pepper, wouldn't you like to be a pepper too? The campaign ran from 1977 until approximately 1983. But it became one of the most recognized advertising campaigns in American television history. The commercials featured Michael Jackson and the Jacksons, Tanya Tucker, Garth Brooks, Jimmy Walker, Jennifer Grey, and even Popeye the Sailor Man. They won multiple Clio Awards, the advertising industry's equivalent of the Oscars. Parodies appeared on Saturday Night Live's successor SCTV. The robot in the 1986 film Short Circuit quoted the jingle as its very first line. Yet the campaign did what campaigns almost never do. It did not just sell a product, it created a tribal identity. People did not just drink Dr. Pepper, they called themselves Peppers. The word became a badge of belonging, a marker of someone who had chosen the road not taken in the soda aisle, someone who refused the predictability of cola. For a brief, luminous period in the late 1970s and early 80s, being a pepper meant something. Meanwhile, the company also hired singer Donna Loren in 1963 as the Dr. Pepper Girl, and she served as spokesperson until 1968, appearing on Dick Clark's American Bandstand, in beach party films, on billboards, on calendars, and on television specials. The brand was building a culture, not just a customer base. But here's what nobody saw coming. Exactly as the Be a Pepper campaign was reaching its cultural peak, the financial foundations of the company were crumbling. The joy on the surface disguised a crisis building underneath. The golden age of Dr. Pepper's independence was about to come to an abrupt and humiliating end. If you're finding this story fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue bringing you these deep dives into history. This story only gets more dramatic from here. 1982, Dallas, Texas. The decade had arrived with economic brutality. Inflation had ravaged the late 1970s. Interest rates had spiked to historic highs by the early 1980s under Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker. Consumer spending was under pressure across every category. The soft drink industry was consolidating rapidly, and the two titans, Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, had the marketing budgets, the distribution networks, and the financial reserves to weather any storm. Dr. Pepper had none of those advantages. The Dr. Pepper Company became insolvent in the early 1980s. The exact internal details of its financial collapse have never been fully made public, but the consequences were immediate and devastating. An investment group stepped in and took the company private, stripping some of its assets to pay down debt. cutting overhead wherever it could, and attempting to stabilize the business long enough to find a buyer. The buyer that emerged was the most powerful corporation in the beverage world. In 1986, Coca-Cola announced a deal to acquire the entire Dr. Pepper company for $470 million. It was, on its face, a logical transaction. Coca-Cola would absorb a financially struggling competitor, pay off its debts, roll its distribution under the Coca-Cola network, and simply add Dr. Pepper as another flavor in its expanding portfolio. For Dr. Pepper, he already stripped of much of its independence. It would mean corporate death, absorbed into a machine that would preserve the name but eliminate the identity. The Federal Trade Commission disagreed. In a ruling that would echo through antitrust law for decades, the FTC challenged the acquisition on two grounds. First, Dr. Pepper competed directly with existing Coca-Cola products, particularly Mr. Pibb. Second, and more critically, the acquisition would so dramatically concentrate the soft drink market that it would create the conditions for tacit price collusion between Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, the only two companies large enough to remain after the deal. The FTC successfully moved to block the transaction. The district court in Washington, D.C. issued the injunction. Coca-Cola was out. Almost simultaneously, PepsiCo had attempted to purchase the 7-Up company from Philip Morris, and that deal was also blocked by the FTC on identical antitrust grounds. Both soda giants had overreached. Into the gap stepped a Dallas investment firm called Hicks & Haas, led by Thomas O. Hicks and Robert Haas. In August of 1986, Hicks & Haas completed a leveraged buyout of Dr. Pepper from the previous investment group, paying $416 million. Months later, in October of 1986, they purchased 7-Up from Philip Morris for $240 million. Now they owned both Orphans, and their plan was to merge them. In 1988, Hicks & Haas merged Dr. Pepper and 7-Up into a single company called Dr. Pepper/7-Up Companies, Incorporated. Together, the merged entity held roughly 11% of the American soft drink market. It was a union of convenience rather than love. Two brands that had both been rejected by the giants, finding warmth in each other's company. The merger had cost no one fully anticipated because the FTC had blocked Coca-Cola's purchase on antitrust grounds. The merged company was forced to surrender its international rights to the Dr. Pepper name. Coca-Cola received most of the non-U.S. rights to Dr. Pepper. PepsiCo took the 7-Up international rights. America's original soda was now, quite literally, divided against itself. 1995. London, England. Cadbury Schweppes, plc was, at its core, a candy company. It made chocolate. It made chewing gum. It made confectionery that filled aisles in British grocery stores and holiday gift sets the world over. But it was also, through its Schweppes beverage division, a global soft drink company with brands in ginger ale, tonic water, and mixers. At the acquisition of Dr. Pepper/7-Up companies in January of 1995 for $1.7 billion, plus roughly $870 million in debt, made Cadbury Schweppes the largest soft drink company in the world that was not named after a cola. For Dr. Pepper, the Cadbury era brought resources and international reach it had never possessed. The British company invested in diet variants, in new flavor extensions, and in the marketing campaigns that kept the brand visible across North America. Under Cadbury's ownership, Dr. Pepper continued to hold its position as the number 3 soft drink brand in the United States, trailing Coke and Pepsi by enormous margins, but comfortably ahead of every other competitor. But Cadbury's heart was never really in beverages. The company's leadership increasingly saw its soft drink division as a distraction from the more profitable confectionery business. Internally, yet the divisions between candy executives and beverage executives were deep. The soft drink brands, Dr. Pepper, Canada Dry, Schweppes, A&W, Crush, Sunkist, and dozens of others, were managed as a portfolio rather than as a passion. The antitrust battles continued unabated. In 1995, the same year Cadbury completed its acquisition, the FTC blocked yet another proposed merger between Coca-Cola and Dr. Pepper. Again citing concerns about the monopolization of the pepper flavor category of soft drinks. The drink that had been sued, acquired, blocked, merged, and sold was now generating antitrust precedent in 3 separate decades. Federal courts and economists had essentially been forced to invent a new flavor category, pepper soda, just to handle the legal complexity Dr. Pepper created. Then came 1996. Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones struck marketing deals with Dr. Pepper and several other companies at Texas Stadium in Irving, Texas, deals that the NFL said violated its exclusive marketing agreements with Coca-Cola. The subsequent lawsuit involved Jerry Jones, the Dallas Cowboys, NFL properties, Nike, and Dr. Pepper in a tangle of commercial interests that ultimately resolved when the NFL agreed to allow Jones and other individual team owners to pursue their own sponsorship arrangements. Dr. Pepper was somehow at the center of professional football's most contentious commercial dispute of the decade. Meanwhile, a crisis was quietly building in the distribution network. Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, who had long bottled and distributed Dr. Pepper products in various markets through contractual arrangements, were beginning to drop Dr. Pepper lines in favor of their own expanding in-house brands. The loss of those distribution networks would take years to fully manifest. But the damage was already beginning. The problem was not the drink. The problem was that the drink had no powerful parent to fight for it. Then, something happened that would finally force a reckoning. Cadbury announced it was getting out of soft drinks entirely. The candy company wanted to be a candy company, and in doing so, it would put Dr. Pepper back on the open market, again, for any buyer willing to take it. May 5th, 2008, New York, New York. Cadbury Schweppes announced the formal spin-off of its North American beverage business on May 5th, 2008. The new company, stripped free of its British candy parent and thrust onto the New York Stock Exchange, was called the Dr. Pepper Snapple Group. Trading of its shares began on May 7, 2008, under the ticker symbol DPS. For the first time in decades, Dr. Pepper was the flagship brand of its own dedicated beverage company. No candy maker at the helm. Was no investment bank in the wings? Just beverages. On paper, it should have been the moment of liberation. In practice, it was a company with enormous debt, a fractured distribution network, and a brand portfolio that needed serious investment to compete with the marketing firepower of Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. The Dr. Pepper Snapple Group managed a sprawling collection of more than 50 brands, including Snapple, Canada Dry, A&W, Sunkist, Crush, Bai, Bomb, and many others. But the infrastructure to distribute them nationally was a patchwork of relationships rather than a coherent system. The years immediately following the spin-off brought both genuine progress and structural pain. The company launched Dr. Pepper 10 in 2011, a 10-calorie drink positioned as masculine, with the deliberately provocative slogan, "It's not for women." The campaign attracted controversy immediately. Critics called it blatantly sexist. Women organized social media campaigns against it. The product was eventually discontinued in 2018 due to persistently low sales. The attempt to create a cultural moment had created a reputational wound instead. But the real crisis was distribution. For years, Coca-Cola and PepsiCo bottlers had carried Dr. Pepper lines alongside their own products under contractual agreements. In the 2000s, as Coca-Cola and PepsiCo acquired their own bottling operations and began consolidating distribution internally, they increasingly prioritized their own brands over Dr. Pepper. In 2006 and 2007, Cadbury Schweppes had purchased the Dr. Pepper/7-Up bottling group and several other regional bottlers specifically to combat this trend, to build the infrastructure to distribute its own products without depending on rivals. The cost of those acquisitions had loaded the balance sheet with debt that the newly independent Dr. Pepper Snapple Group now had to manage. Meanwhile, the Dr. Pepper Snapple Group launched its Fansville college football campaign in 2018, an episodic, humorous series of commercials set in a fictional town obsessed with college sports, and found at last a marketing approach that resonated powerfully with a broad American audience. But here's the thing about building something real. It takes time, and investors do not always wait for time. By 2017, the company was profitable and growing, but it was still a distant third in a market structured around two giants. The question hanging over every board meeting was the same. Was Dr. Pepper Snapple Group big enough, strong enough, and independent enough to survive alone? The answer, ultimately, was no. The 1990s through the 2010s, Texas, Oklahoma, and the American South. While the corporate battles raged in boardrooms and courtrooms, on the ground in the American South, something very different was happening. Dr. Pepper was not losing, it was winning, comprehensively and defiantly, in the territory it had always called home. Understanding Dr. Pepper's corporate tragedy requires understanding this paradox. A brand that was perpetually orphaned at the executive level was perpetually beloved at the street level. Roanoke, Virginia, had been named the Dr. Pepper capital of the world after John William Bill Davis opened Virginia's first Dr. Pepper plant east of the Mississippi there in 1936. The city broke world records for per capita Dr. Pepper consumption in the late 1950s. As of 2006, Roanoke's Valley consumed more Dr. Pepper per capita than any other metropolitan area east of the Mississippi River. In October of 2015, the city of Roanoke celebrated October 24th as official Dr. Pepper Day. A beverage company was a municipal identity. In Dublin, Texas, a small bottling plant run by W.P. Bill Closter famously refused to convert from cane sugar to high-fructose corn syrup when the rest of the industry made the switch in the early 1980s. The result was Dublin Dr. Pepper, a version of the drink made with the original sweetener that became a cult phenomenon, as eventually distributing to most of Texas and the internet by 2003. People drove hours to buy it. They ordered it online and paid shipping costs that exceeded the price of the soda. It was devotion that no marketing department could have manufactured. In 1989, a group of Waco civic leaders converted the original Artesian Manufacturing and Bottling Company building, the first facility ever built specifically to bottle Dr. Pepper, into the Dr. Pepper Museum and Free Enterprise Institute. The museum opened to the public on May 11, 1991, on the 38th anniversary of the devastating 1953 F5 tornado that had struck downtown Waco. The building, completed in 1906 and producing beverages until 1965, became a place of pilgrimage for fans of the drink and historians of American industry alike. By 2009, a ledger book believed to contain an early Dr. Pepper formula was discovered by Bill Waters while shopping at antique stores in the Texas Panhandle. Several sheets trace back to the original Morrison drugstore. One recipe, titled Dr. Pepper's Peps and Bitters, set off a media frenzy. Was this the original formula? Keurig Dr. Pepper's eventual predecessor companies said no, calling it a medicinal recipe for a digestive aid. The book went to auction in May of 2009. No one purchased it. Meanwhile, however, The Coca-Cola and PepsiCo distribution machinery was systematically pulling back from Dr. Pepper in ways that would matter enormously. The drink had deep roots and fierce loyalty in the South, but roots alone do not distribute product. Why? And what was coming? What nobody in Roanoke or Dublin or Waco quite understood yet was a corporate earthquake that would reshape who controlled this drink, possibly forever. 1951 through 1998. Federal courts across the United States. No American soft drink company has spent more time in federal antitrust proceedings than Dr. Pepper. Its entire corporate history, from the first lawsuit against Coca-Cola in 1951 to the multiple FTC challenges of the 1980s and 90s, is a study in what happens when a small independent company exists in a market dominated by two giants and repeatedly refuses to submit. The 1986 confrontation between Dr. Pepper and Coca-Cola produced some of the most significant antitrust jurisprudence in the soft drink industry's history. In FTC versus Coca-Cola Company, et al. 641 F. Sup. 1128, the district court in Washington laid out in explicit terms what the acquisition of Dr. Pepper by Coca-Cola would actually mean. The court found that Dr. Pepper would cease to exist as an independent competitor. Its concentrate manufacturing would be moved to Puerto Rico. Its employees would be terminated as their functions were merged into Coca-Cola's operations. The brand, if it retained a name, it would become essentially a shell. Its principal product merely another flavor in Coca-Cola Company's expanding product line. The court issued the injunction. The deal collapsed. The significance of these proceedings went beyond Dr. Pepper itself. Federal economists and judges were forced, repeatedly, to grapple with a fundamental question. What kind of drink is Dr. Pepper? Is it a cola? In which case, a cola giant buying it would represent an obvious monopoly concern? Or is it something else? A distinct category of its own? In which case different antitrust standards might apply? Court after court, economist after economist, concluded that Dr. Pepper was indeed something else. It was a pepper drink, a category unto itself. That determination protected it from being swallowed by cola, but it also confined it. Every time Dr. Pepper sought a merger partner among the giants, yet the FTC invoked the same concern. Giving any cola company control of the pepper category would eliminate meaningful competition in that space. It was a legal straitjacket built out of praise. The courts were saying, in effect, you are too distinctive to be owned by anyone who already matters in this market. In 1996 came the NFL dispute involving Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones. Jones had signed marketing agreements with Dr. Pepper. The Dr. Pepper, Nike, and other companies at Texas Stadium. Agreements the NFL said violated its exclusive deal with Coca-Cola. The league filed suit. Jones countersued. The dispute dragged on for months before the NFL agreed to allow team owners to pursue their own arrangements. Dr. Pepper won again. But winning against the NFL and winning against Coca-Cola over and over was exhausting and expensive. In 1998, the pepper flavor category appeared again as a central analytical framework in antitrust proceedings between Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. Dr. Pepper had, by this point, so thoroughly established its legal separateness that it had essentially become a third category in soft drink law. Not cola, not alternative. A permanent third option that the legal system was required to account for whenever it evaluated the competitive dynamics of the beverage industry. But legal victories do not translate into market victories, and the market was, with quiet relentlessness, continuing to consolidate around two names that were not Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper's. We're halfway through this incredible story. If you're enjoying it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means everything. The comeback that's coming is one of the most unexpected in American business history. January 29th, 2018, Burlington, Vermont. Keurig Green Mountain was, at its core, a coffee company. Founded in 1979 by Bob Stiller in Vermont, it had been acquired by and merged with Keurig, a single-serve brewing system invented by Peter Dragone and John Sylvan in 1992, to create a company that had revolutionized how Americans made coffee at home. The K-Cup was its product. The countertop pod brewer was its empire. By 2016, the investment firm JAB Holding Company, the Luxembourg-based entity controlled by the Raimond family, had acquired Keurig Green Mountain for approximately $13.9 billion. Now JAB wanted more. Specifically, JAB wanted a beverage company with the distribution infrastructure to place its brands in every grocery store, convenience store, and restaurant in America. Dr. Pepper Snapple Group had exactly that infrastructure. On January 29, 2018, Keurig Green Mountain announced it was acquiring the Dr. Pepper Snapple Group in an $18.7 billion all-stock transaction. The combined company would be called Keurig Dr. Pepper. The deal closed on July 9, 2018. The structure of the deal was striking. Dr. Pepper Snapple Group shareholders would own just 13% of the combined company. Keurig's shareholder, Mondelez International, itself the former candy parent of Cadbury, which had once owned Dr. Pepper, would own 13 to 14%. JAB Holdings would hold the remaining majority stake. Larry Young, who had been president and CEO of the Dr. Pepper Snapple Group, retired those positions and joined the board of directors of the new combined entity. For Dr. Pepper, the drink, the transaction meant something specific and strange. It was now part of a company whose most famous product was a countertop appliance that brewed single-serve cups of coffee. Yet the press struggled to explain the logic. Coffee and carbonated soft drinks seemed, on the surface, to have nothing to do with each other. The synergies being cited, distribution networks, retail relationships, manufacturing scale, were real but abstract. To the person in the gas station reaching for a cold Dr. Pepper, nothing appeared to have changed. To the person who had spent a lifetime watching Dr. Pepper get passed around between corporate parents, everything had changed. Yet there was one immediate and significant benefit. Keurig Dr. Pepper's combined annual revenue in 2020 was $11.6 billion. For the first time in 40 years, Dr. Pepper was part of an entity with genuine financial muscle, not a candy company that considered beverages a side project, not a leveraged buyout firm managing debt, but a publicly traded North American beverage giant with the capital to invest seriously in distribution, marketing, and product development, and invest it did. The Fansville campaign, already running since 2018, was expanded aggressively. New flavors were introduced annually: Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream in 2023, Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut in 2024. The company began building its own national distribution infrastructure, reducing its dependence on Coca-Cola and PepsiCo bottlers. Something was shifting. Something was building. Yet the drink that had been orphaned for 40 years was finally, perhaps, finding a home. 2023, nationwide. In 2003, Dr. Pepper ranked 6th among American soft drink brands by sales volume, tied with Sprite. It was a distant third company, behind Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, and nowhere near the number 2 brand slot that Pepsi had held, nearly without interruption, since 1985. 2 decades of gradual gains had gone largely unnoticed outside the beverage industry trade press. Then, in the spring of 2024, the trade publication Beverage Digest published its annual market share data, and the numbers caused a minor sensation. Dr. Pepper had surpassed Pepsi. For the first time in the history of the American soft drink market, the drink born in a Texas drugstore in 1885 had risen past the cola that had held the number 2 position for nearly 4 decades. Coca-Cola remained firmly in first place with 19.2% of the market, but Dr. Pepper and Pepsi had reached 8.3% each, with Dr. Pepper technically ahead. By mid-2024, the lead was confirmed and growing. The Wall Street Journal reported it. Fortune reported it. CNN ran the story. NPR played the Be a Pepper jingle to mark the occasion. Dwayne Stanford, editor of Beverage Digest, told CNN, Dr. Pepper has been gaining, Pepsi has been declining, and they're meeting in the middle. It was one of the most quietly dramatic reversals in consumer market history. A brand that had been financially insolvent 40 years earlier, that had been sold and resold and stripped of its international identity. That had been described by a federal court as being worth preserving only because no one powerful enough to preserve it could legally own it, had just become America's second most popular soda. The reasons were multiple and reinforcing. Keurig Dr. Pepper's chief marketing officer, Andrew Springate, noted that the brand was growing fastest among Generation Z consumers. The very demographic that both Coca-Cola and PepsiCo were spending enormous resources to court. The Dirty Dr. Pepper trend on TikTok, a viral recipe combining Dr. Pepper with lime juice and coconut-flavored coffee creamer, drove so much organic social media engagement that the company released a formal non-alcoholic product called Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut in response. When a 19-year-old in a TikTok video drives a major product launch, the brand has achieved something that no amount of traditional advertising can buy. The Fansville College football campaign, and now running for multiple seasons, had created an episodic fictional universe around college football culture that felt genuinely entertaining, rather than merely promotional. The brand was, for the first time in decades, generating cultural content rather than just marketing messages. Meanwhile, Pepsi was distracted. PepsiCo's food division, Frito-Lay, Quaker Oats, and a sprawling snacks portfolio had grown to represent 59% of the company's total sales. The focus on zero-sugar drink lines and diversified food brands meant that classic Pepsi was receiving less marketing attention and investment than it had historically. The giant had blinked, and Dr. Pepper, for the first time in its long, turbulent, orphaned life, was ready to take advantage. October 27, 2025, Collin County, Texas. The distribution of beverages in America is an invisible war fought on loading docks, in courtrooms, and over contract renewal tables. Most consumers never think about it. They simply open a refrigerator case, reach for a Dr. Pepper, and leave. The machinery that puts the drink into that case is a web of agreements, bottling contracts, franchise arrangements, and territorial rights that date back in some cases to the 1950s. And for decades, that web had kept Dr. Pepper dependent on the very companies it was competing with. Reyes Coca-Cola Bottling, known as RCCB, it was one of the largest Coca-Cola bottlers in the United States and had distributed Dr. Pepper products in California and Nevada under a long-standing franchise agreement. In 2025, Keurig Dr. Pepper moved to terminate that agreement, announcing its intention to take over direct store delivery of its brands in those regions. CCB filed suit alleging that KDP had unlawfully terminated the franchise without proper grounds. Citing us CCB's substantial investments and consistent compliance with the terms of their agreement. A Collin County District Court judge disagreed. The court issued a summary judgment in favor of Keurig Dr. Pepper. The termination was ruled effective as of October 27, 2025. For the first time in decades, yet Dr. Pepper was taking back direct control of its own distribution in key American markets, removing the intermediaries that had both sustained and constrained it for most of its corporate life. The implications were significant and immediate. Mr. Pibb, Coca-Cola's long-standing Dr. Pepper competitor, created after Dr. Pepper's successful trademark lawsuit in 1972, was positioned by Coca-Cola to step into the fountain spaces that Dr. Pepper was vacating during the transition. Sanmao, some locations that had offered Dr. Pepper at their soda fountains would temporarily find it replaced by its corporate rival's alternative. The irony was almost theatrical. The lawsuit that had forced Coca-Cola to create Mr. Pibb in 1972 was now, 53 years later, creating the market conditions that Mr. Pibb had always been waiting for. Keurig Dr. Pepper moved quickly to reassure consumers and commercial customers. Maya's company statement read, "We are excited to take back Dr. Pepper distribution onto our own trucks in a few key geographies, and we anticipate little to no impact to consumers. Dr. Pepper is in high demand, the most popular beverage with Gen Z, and it will continue to be at your favorite retailer. The bottled and canned product in retail stores was unaffected, but the fountain battle, fought daily in fast food restaurants, movie theaters, and convenience stores, was the most visible front in the ongoing war for market presence. Dr. Pepper was, for the first time in its 140-year history, fighting that war with its own army, and it was winning. The question was whether the winning could last, whether the drink that had survived insolvency, corporate raiding, antitrust blockades, and 4 successive ownership changes could finally build something permanent from the rubble of its past. The present. In 2 safe deposit boxes in 2 separate banks in Dallas, Texas, somewhere in 2 separate vaults in the city of Dallas, Texas, 2 halves of a formula sit in sealed containers that have not been read aloud to any living person outside the company in over 100 years. Together, they constitute the recipe for a drink that has survived longer than Coca-Cola, that has outlasted dozens of corporate parents, that has been sued over, blocked over, and stolen from, or nearly stolen from, by the most powerful beverage companies on earth. And yet the formula itself has never been compromised. Not once. In 140 years. This fact is worth pausing on. Coca-Cola's formula is famous for its secrecy, but its recipe has been the subject of at least 2 major publications claiming to reveal its contents, and former employees have made detailed claims about its ingredients. Dr. Pepper's formula has generated nothing comparable, yet the persistent rumor that it contains prune juice has been officially denied by every version of the company that has ever owned it. A book of formulas discovered by antique shopper Bill Waters in 2009, containing a recipe titled Dr. Pepper's Pepsin Bitters, was examined by corporate historians and dismissed as a medicinal remedy for digestive ailments, not the soft drink formula. The book sold at auction in May of 2009. It received no bids. The 23 flavors themselves are the subject of endless speculation. Cherry is universally identified. Vanilla is widely suspected. Amaretto, licorice, blackberry, apricot, caramel, pepper, anise. Various food scientists and flavor analysts have made guesses, but none have been confirmed. The FDA's determination that Dr. Pepper is not a cola, not a root beer, and not a fruit-flavored beverage has effectively made the formula's category a legal mystery as much as a culinary one. As it belongs to its own classification, its own world, defined not by what it is, but by what it is not. This mystery, this fundamental unclassifiability, is perhaps the most important thing about Dr. Pepper's survival. In a market where Coca-Cola and Pepsi had spent a century trying to define everything by whether it was or was not cola, Dr. Pepper simply refused to fit the frame. Courts could not categorize it without inventing a new category. Competitors could not copy it. Even the companies that owned it could not fully explain it. The drink that Alderton invented in 1885 was, in the most literal sense, a secret kept by a formula and protected by a mystery. And in a business world that rewards certainty, predictability, and measurability, there is something almost defiant about a drink that has survived for a century and a half on the strength of nobody knowing quite what it is. Then something unexpected happened at the end of 2025 that suggested the mystery was not a liability. It was a marketing advantage. A TikToker named Romeo Bingham, posting under the account name at Romeo's Show, recorded an 11-second video in which she sang, "Dr. Pepper, baby, it's good and nice. Do should see good kind. Do. She tagged the company and asked them to collaborate. The video went viral. Dr. Pepper responded in the comments. They licensed the jingle. On January 19th, 2026, the 15-second commercial aired during the College Football Playoff National Championship game on national television. A 23-flavor secret, a 140-year mystery, and an 11-second TikTok jingle that played on America's biggest sports night. Dr. Pepper had survived everything, and it was somehow still exactly itself. The full timeline, Waco, Texas, to Burlington, Vermont, to everywhere. To understand what Dr. Pepper's orphanhood actually cost, you have to count the losses that never appeared on a balance sheet. Not the financial insolvency of the early 1980s, which was catastrophic enough. Not the $470 million acquisition that the FTC blocked, which would have eliminated the brand entirely. Not the $1.7 billion paid by Cadbury or the $18.7 billion paid by Keurig. The deeper losses were subtler and more permanent. The international identity was the first and most devastating. When Hicks and Haas merged Dr. Pepper and 7-Up in 1988 after the failed Coca-Cola acquisition, the company surrendered its international rights to the Dr. Pepper name as part of the antitrust settlement. Coca-Cola received most non-U.S. rights to Dr. Pepper. That decision, made under legal and financial duress, meant that the brand that called itself America's Original Soda had no control over how it was represented in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America. In the United Kingdom, Dr. Pepper is distributed by Coca-Cola. In South Korea, in Japan, and Ireland. The drink is in those markets, but on terms its creators never chose, and under corporate parents that compete with it at home. The second loss was more subtle, but equally consequential. Time. Every corporate transition, every acquisition, merger, spin-off, and leveraged buyout consumed years of management attention, employee uncertainty, and strategic distraction. The 18-month gap between Cadbury's announcement of the spin-off and the public listing of Dr. Pepper Snapple Group. The 18 months between Keurig's announcement and the deal's close. Years in which the brand could have been investing in distribution, innovation, and marketing were instead spent on integration, the restructuring, and organizational redesign. The third loss was cultural. In the years when Coca-Cola was building its mythology, the polar bear, Santa Claus, the Hilltop commercial, and PepsiCo was building its celebrity ecosystem. Michael Jackson, Britney Spears, the Pepsi Challenge. Dr. Pepper was being managed by a candy company, a Dallas investment bank, and eventually a coffee pod manufacturer. None of these entities had the existential commitment to Dr. Pepper that Coca-Cola had to Coke or PepsiCo had to Pepsi. The brand was always someone else's secondary priority. And yet, despite every loss, despite every betrayal by corporate circumstance, the drink itself never changed. The formula in those 2 Dallas bank vaults was never altered. The 23 flavors that Charles Alderton assembled in 1885 remained. Through insolvency, through acquisition, through antitrust battles, through candy companies and coffee giants. Exactly what they had always been. The brand could be sold, the rights could be divided, the distribution could be stripped away. But the thing inside the bottle was inviolable. That immutability is either the greatest tragedy or the greatest triumph of Dr. Pepper's story, depending on how you look at it. A tragedy because so much was lost in the corporate maneuvering around it. Yet a triumph because the thing that mattered most, the drink itself, survived it all. And in 2023, that drink, unchanged since 1885, became the #2 soda in America. The Orphan had come home. Not to a family exactly, but to a market that finally understood what it had always been. Walk back into Morrison's old corner drugstore in Waco, Texas. Stand at the soda fountain where Charles Alderton once stood, mixing combinations that nobody else was mixing, chasing a smell he could not quite describe. The building at the corner of 5th and Mary Street still stands. It is the Dr. Pepper Museum now. 3 floors of exhibits, a working soda fountain, a gift shop full of memorabilia, and the quiet echo of something that began here 140 years ago and refused, against every imaginable corporate pressure, to end. If you visit today, you can drink a Dr. Pepper poured from the original building's fountain and think about everything that drink has survived. You can look at the photographs of the delivery men and the bottling plant workers and the long rows of glass bottles moving along conveyor belts in 1950 and wonder what they would make of 2026, of TikTok jingles and antitrust settlements and an $18.7 billion merger with a company that makes coffee machines. 3 lessons live in this story, and they are worth naming. The first is that identity is the only thing that cannot be acquired. Coca-Cola tried to buy Dr. Pepper. The FTC stopped them. PepsiCo never tried, but the courts would have stopped them too. Cadbury owned it for 13 years and never really understood it. Hicks and Haas owned both it and 7-Up and eventually surrendered both to a British candy maker. But through every transaction, through every leveraged buyout and corporate spin-off, the drink itself remained Dr. Pepper, not Coke, not Pepsi, not anything that could be explained in a quarterly earnings call. The formula in those 2 Dallas vaults protected something that no acquisition document could touch. Identity, genuine, irreducible identity, survives even the most ruthless corporate predation. The second lesson is that markets eventually reward patience. Dr. Pepper spent 40 years in corporate limbo, owned by entities that did not prioritize it, managed by organizations that were focused elsewhere, and yet it held its position, held its formula, and held its loyal base in the South and Southwest through all of it. When the right combination of ownership, distribution, investment, and cultural timing finally aligned, when Keurig Dr. Pepper's marketing resources met Generation Z's appetite for something that was not Coke and not Pepsi, the decades of patient brand equity paid off all at once. So the third lesson is the most unsettling. Independence is more fragile than it looks. Dr. Pepper was independent from 1885 until the early 1980s, nearly 100 years. Then, in the space of a single decade, it was insolvent, acquired, blocked, merged, and sold to a British candy company. Meanwhile, the forces that destroyed Dr. Pepper's independence were not incompetence or laziness, but structural economics, the inability of a mid-sized independent beverage company to sustain itself against 2 vertically integrated global giants in a capital-intensive distribution business. The lesson is not that independence is impossible. It is that independence requires the kind of relentless, capitalized, strategic defense that most companies cannot sustain indefinitely. 141 years, 5 corporate parents, 14 lawsuits, $470 million that would have ended it. $18.7 billion that may have saved it. Market share in 2024, 8.3%. Second in America. First in mystery. Somewhere in 2 safe deposit boxes and 2 Dallas banks, the formula waits. It has always waited. And if you walk into almost any convenience store in the country, you reach past the Coke and the Pepsi and pull out a can of Dr. Pepper. You can taste everything that survived. The pharmacist's curiosity, the drugstore's smell, the 23 flavors that nobody has ever quite named. It is not a cola. It never was. It is something rarer and original.